Hello everybody, this is Professor Lombardo. In the last video we learned how to create, using the frequency command, a frequency chart for a range of scores. In this video I want to show you how to create a histogram in Excel, which is the primary way we're going to take a look at our data and try to determine its shape. So I want to get started here with this basic data set. So I have my data set on the left, a collection of different numbers. And I've started my usual analysis when I want to create a frequency chart. I look at the max and the min. I use that to compute the range. And I also take a quick look at the sample size, just in case we want to convert our frequencies into relative frequencies. Assuming we want to use about 12 bins for this frequency chart, we would compute the bin size by taking our range and dividing by the number of bars that we want in the histogram, or the number of different bins we want for our frequency chart. So that comes out to about 2.32. So I just rounded this up. You can round down. I don't really have a preference which way you end up rounding this computed bin size, so long as you make it clear and then your bins reflect that choice. So as a quick review, I would start with a number just slightly smaller than the min, and then I would use a cell referencing formula that counts up by the chosen bin size. So I would take the previous cell, which is 4, and add 3, and then I fill that down so that I'm essentially starting at 4 and counting up by 3s until I get above the maximum. From there, I would highlight one cell beyond the associated bins on the left, and I would start typing out my frequency array command, making sure that at the end I hold Command Shift and Enter. Or if I'm on a PC, I'd use Control and Enter. Okay, so what we want to do next is create a histogram. And the way that we do this in Excel is essentially we highlight just the column of frequencies. We go to the Insert tab, and we're going to insert a column chart. So we're going to use just the first option here, which is a clustered column chart. Nothing fancy. And it essentially just creates a vertical bar chart. Now, what differentiates a histogram from a vertical bar chart is that there really shouldn't be any spaces in between here. So here's how we're going to adjust that. If you click on any one of the bars, it'll kind of highlight all of them. And if you right-click, you'll have an option to format your data series. So you're going to click on that Format Data Series. And one of the options that should pop up is your gap width. I think you can kind of see the ribbon that it appears under. It's not under the paint option where you can change the colors, or this option to change some other effects, but it's the actual plot series stuff. So our gap width here is 219%. If we switch this over to 0 and hit Enter, you'll notice that all of our bars are sitting up right next against each other. And this gives us a better sense of the shape of what's going on here. Okay? So this is a quick way to generate a histogram and get a sense for the shape of your data. What we might want to do is take this histogram, and if we had time, if we were going to include it in a report or something, we would want to tidy it up a little bit. So there's two things we might want to change. First of all, we might want to see the divisions between the bars a little better. So we can use that same basic technique here. If we click on the bars so that they're all highlighted, and you right-click and do a Format Data Series, if you go into the Paint Bucket option, you can choose a border. You click on the solid line border. You probably want to change the color. I would say something like black. It'll show up a little better against the blue, and maybe thicken the edge a little bit. And in doing so, now you can kind of see where each one of the bars associated to a given bin ends up overlapping. The other thing we're going to want to change here is the X-label labels here. Because they just assumed, since we only highlighted the frequencies, they just assumed that the first frequency was associated to 1, the second frequency was associated to 2. And if you're just looking at the shape, this is fine. But to draw some actual information out of this, we want to label these things a little bit better. So if you click on that X label, set of X labels, and then you right-click to Format Axis, you can change some of these positions on the tick marks and things like that. What we want to do instead is click on the chart and hit the Select Data button up in the upper right corner. Okay. Now you'll notice there's a category here for horizontal axis labels. So what we're going to choose instead is we're going to click on this little box here, and it's going to give us the option to highlight the labels that we would rather use for that particular piece. So we can highlight those labels, come back and hit OK, and it should update these. Okay? So now when we read this histogram of scores, right, in the same way that we would read the frequency chart, we would read it as there are no scores below 4, there's maybe roughly 3 scores between 7 and 4, there's 6 scores between 10 and 7, etc., etc., etc. The last thing you might want to do here is just add some axis labels. To do this, there's an add chart element in the upper left-hand corner. You can add axes titles. So for the horizontal, you might just put bin ranges as your x-axis title. And we might want to add a vertical axis title. And here we can just use frequencies to indicate that we're doing actual counts rather than relative frequencies, which would be represented as a percentage. So this is a pretty decent looking histogram of scores. One final thing you might want to do with your histogram, if you were to include this in a statistical report, it turns out these particular axis labels with the 4, the 7, the 10, etc., they aren't very descriptive. Your reader could probably infer what you mean. However, it's better to create better axis labels so that this explicitly says x less than or equal to 4. So only scores that are less than or equal to 4, scores between 4 and 7, scores between 7 and 10, etc. So typically what you would end up doing if you're gonna make a report, so you're not just taking a quick look at the shape of the data, is you would set up your set of bin labels. And you would explicitly write out what each bin is associated to. So this 0 count is the number of scores less than or equal to 4. This 3 count is the number between 7 and 4. And I won't teach you this explicitly, but I'm happy to share with people who are interested. There are kind of formulas you can use so that you can fill down this process. You don't have to type this out piece by piece, just by referencing the actual bin numbers you set up previously. But either way, so what you would do is, as we saw before, go into your chart design ribbon, do select data, rather than using just the bins as your chart range, or sorry, as your labels range, or your horizontal x-axis label range. You'd highlight these nicer bin labels, and it would give you something like this. One thing that I like to do when I provide these more specific labels for my histogram is I like to kind of turn them on their side. See how they're all kind of running together right now? If you highlight those values, right-click, do Format Axis, you can go to this little measurement piece, and under the alignment, there's something called Custom Angle. If you type in -60, it kind of gives them a little left-hand turn. So you can still read it, but it's pretty clear which label is associated to which bar. Okay, so hopefully that helps. So we'll talk more about histograms in class.